Well, Rockets fans, the draft lottery has come and gone, and Houston walks away with the fourth overall pick. Not the worst of options, at least they're not the Detroit Pistons or in a spot lower than the fifth pick like the Pistons got. But being at the fourth pick, that also wasn't the most ideal spot. Obviously, getting number one for Wimbyana would have been great. Even getting number two would have been a great consolation prize because then the Rockets could have their pick between Scoot Henderson or Brandon Miller. Being at number four, that theoretically means that Wembanyama will be going to the Spurs, and then either Scoot Henderson or Brandon Miller could be going to Charlotte at number two, and then Portland, if they choose to stay there, could pick up Scoot or Brandon Miller, whoever Charlotte doesn't go after, or Portland trades the pick and whatever team moves into that spot picks one of those guys who's ever left. So that means the Rockets, if they stay at number four, would then be choosing between players like Amen Thompson, possibly Cam Whitmore, maybe a few other guys in that area of the draft. I think there's three scenarios for the Rockets right now that they have pick number four. And on one hand, look, I know it's not ideal that the Rockets are in this position. It would have been immensely better to be in the top three, even if it was pick number three. However, kudos to Rafael Stone and the Rockets. They've maintained flexibility for this offseason, so they do have assets and options to make something work here, whether they stay at pick number four or not. I think there's three scenarios that Houston is probably thinking through now that the draft lottery has come, now that they know their fate and where they sit at pick number four, and I'm going to go through those three scenarios. Scenario number one, obviously, would be to stay at pick number four and make a draft selection with that pick. The only way that this happens, I think, is if Houston feels that they could find either a starting point guard or a starting wing with that pick. I think those are the two positions of priority for Houston. If you look at their current roster, I think for the most part, they're committed to Jalen Green, at least early on, as the starting two, as the starting shooting guard. I know there has been some rumors of potentially floating him in trade value, but I think right now Houston is at the very least going to let Udoka have a chance to work with Jalen Green just to see what more you can get out of him, to see if he can really grow into that long-term option as the shooting guard. So I think shooting guard is set. I think Jabari is absolutely set at power forward. I know he had a slow start to the season, but then he came on towards the end of the season and really showed his potential. I think he fits well into what Udoka wants to do. So I think he's set at the four. And then Udoka has spoke highly of Alperen Şengün. If Wembanyama had been selected, or if the Rockets had to have gotten the first pick, maybe Alperen Şengün would have been involved in some trade talks. But since that's not the case, I think that Şengün is the number five, the center starter for the Rockets, at least in the immediate future. Remember, this is a player that Houston traded up to go get. And then there's now even been some rumors that when Udoka was with Boston, Boston was targeting Şengün. So I think that there's some interest from all parties involved to work with Şengün early on. So if we can assume that shooting guard, power forward, and center probably is set, then that leaves questions around small forward, and that leaves questions around point guard. So this is where things get interesting. I think, again, Houston sticks at number four if they feel like someone like Amen Thompson could be a point guard in Udoka's system. I'm not convinced that that is the case. I'm also not saying that that's not the case. I think right now, Houston's focus becomes... that's something that they start thinking really, really seriously about. Is their potential at number four to find a point guard, maybe an Amen Thompson, to come in and run the show. You notice I'm saying point guard, and I know that as of right now, Kevin Porter Jr. is still on this Rockets team, and he has been the point guard this past few years. I am not convinced that he has shown enough to lock down the point guard position especially for what Udoka likely wants to do. We got to remember Udoka. There's two aspects that keep coming back to me with Udoka when I try to project. Okay, what sort of a team is he going to want to build and run? One is just his playing history. He played in the Spurs organization that values ball movement, that values passing, and you can see that Udoka, to point number two, brought that into his coaching career, specifically when he was with the Celtics. You know, he really, that's something he talked about in his intro press conference with the Celtics, was he wanted to improve the ball movement, and he almost made a jab at Brad Stevens in his intro press conference when he got the Celtics job. Well, guess what? The Rockets are not great at ball movement right now as well. So I know that ball movement and facilitation is going to be a focus of Udoka in this system that he's going to build in Houston. So I say all that to say, is Kevin Porter Jr. the sort of point guard that Udoka probably wants at the position? I don't think so. And I think that's where these questions on what Houston wants to do at point guard come into play. So if they stick at 4, do they think a guy like Amin Thompson could be the point guard to go run the show? I'm not sure. I know he's super athletic. I know he does have the ability to facilitate and to really move the ball. His shooting is a big concern. I'm not convinced that he shoots well enough and facilitates well enough for the Rockets to be like, hey, you know what? If he's the one that's left at pick number 4, let's go with him. So they could stay at number 4. I don't know that they're going to do that. If Houston doesn't stay at number 4, I think they first try to see if they can move up. And of course, in this second scenario of trying to move up, they would first gauge, okay, what do we think Charlotte's going to do at number 2? And then what do we think Portland is going to do at number 3? Are either of those teams going to trade their picks? Are they going to stay there? And if they stay there, who are they going to draft? If it is Scoot Henderson, if it is Brandon Miller going 2, 3, or whatever that combo is, then Houston may think, okay, well then can we trade up to pick number 2 or pick number 3 and target one of those players? I think Scoot or Brandon would instantly fill a void at point guard with Scoot, small forward with Brandon, and I think Houston feels really good about that scenario. So I think if they can trade up at a reasonable price without really having to get rid of some of their core pieces, maybe they look at doing that. They have some extra draft capital still from some Brooklyn picks, some Brooklyn pick swaps, and then some second round picks. And there's probably even some players on the roster that they would be willing to flip in order to make that deal work. So I think that's something they start looking at. Is the price to move up a reasonable price? If it is, I think they strongly consider that. There's also that was 2A. This is scenario 2B. Do they trade down? And does it make sense to trade down? Could Houston potentially look to trade down into the 7 to 10 range? Maybe there's a small forward down there that they want to go target. Maybe there's a point guard prospect down there that they want to go target, and maybe they pick up an asset along the way as well. We know that Houston also wants to add shooting. We know that Houston also probably wants to add a defensive center to pair with Şengün in the post. And could you possibly check those boxes or cross that off in a move down from number 4 if that's available to you? So maybe. And then I think scenario number 3 is, do you completely move out of the lottery? Do you completely trade out of pick number 4 for an established player? Maybe you find your wing that way, or maybe you find your point guard that way. Maybe there's a team that really does value the talent that could be there at number 4, and they're willing to trade an established player to maybe change their own timeline, and maybe Houston acquires it that way. So I think there's 3 scenarios. I think Houston stays at 4 if they feel like they can find a really starting caliber impact sort of player at number 4 that fits what Udoka wants to do and fits what this roster currently has. I think scenario 2, I'm going to call it 2A, is if not, do you trade up? And is the price right to trade up to pick number 2 or maybe even number 3 to lock in one of Scoot Henderson or Brandon Miller? 2B would be, okay, well, what about trading down? Maybe. And then scenario 3 is, do we trade out of the top of this draft? Houston still has a pick later in the draft at pick 20. But do we trade out of the top of this draft, and do you try to find an established player that way? I don't know. I think these are the three overarching general scenarios that Houston is now working through. I think this is where, Rafael Stone is going to make his paycheck, make or break it here. The previous positions have kind of just been a little easier at the top of the draft, with the options that were there, and hey, you get the best player available. Not so much the case here at number 4. I think this is a really interesting spot for the Rockets. It's not the end all be all. It's not the worst position to be in, but Houston's going to have to get creative to really make this work and to walk away from this draft and this position in a successful way. So we'll see what Houston does. Again, I think their two biggest needs right now are figuring out who is going to be running point guard to really unlock this Houston offense, and then what do they want to do at the wing position. And knowing that they want to get some more shooters as well. I think the wing position that they're really looking for is really more of a multi-level impact sort of wing. That does, not to say you can't go add a good jump shooter as well. But I think finding a starting 3, finding a starting point guard are the priorities. And I know that there still are, Kevin Porter Jr. is on this team. I'm not discounting Tari Eason and the potential impact he can have. I think he's still probably viewed as more of a rotation player right now and in the immediate future. But I think those are the two priorities for Houston moving forward. So we'll see what happens. Pick number 4, not the worst place to be in, but also going to have to get creative. We'll see what they can go do. Draft combine, I think, is coming up, starting soon, and I know that there is probably going to be some clues there a little bit as far as who is Houston meeting with, what are some of the pre-draft workouts looking like as far as positions that they're targeting. So as we start to move into this phase, now that the lottery has happened, as we move closer to the NBA draft, we'll also see what some of the free agency rumors are for Houston as well, and hopefully that can give us some more context. So we'll see where it goes, and just keep tracking this as things progress. Talk to y'all later.